International, www.netivyahinternational.org.
Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and together with Brad TV, we're going throughout the whole Torah, following the readings in all the synagogues of Jewish people in the world, including Messianic Jews. Many of them are reading from the Torah, the same order like the rest of Israel reads. And we are approaching the end of the book of Genesis. We're in the last portion that is read in the synagogues this next Shabbat. And it starts with the word Vayechi. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. He lived. But very interesting, in chapter 25, when we did the portion of Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, and it's called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, Sarah dies. And Abraham dies in the same portion. And now we are Vayechi, and he lived, and Jacob dies. There is something prophetic about these readings. But I want to go back a little bit to last week's portion, which in my opinion is one of the most dramatic and one of the most interesting Torah portions in the whole Torah. It couldn't be the best Hollywood producer and director and actors could not capture the drama, the intensity, and the importance of last week's portion. We started talking about the story of Joseph in chapter 37 of Genesis, from riches to rags, and then from rags to riches in the following portion. From prison, he becomes the prime minister of Egypt, the man next to Pharaoh himself. And in chapter 44, 45, 46, we see that the brothers also go from rags to riches. They thought that if Joseph discovers that they are his brothers who sold him, who wanted to kill him, who hated him, who despised him, if he now is this most powerful in Egypt next to Pharaoh, that he's going to do them great harm. But, on the contrary, they were full of fear when Joseph said, "I am Joseph, your brother." Very dramatic scene. All the Egyptians were driven out of the room. Only Joseph and his brothers are there in that room. And the steam of their fear and the sweat of their brow filled the room. And then Joseph says, "I am Joseph, your brother." And they're full of fear, and he says, "Hey, stop fearing. Because what you thought was for evil, God turned it for good." This principle that appears in Romans chapter 8 also, that says all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord. The same principle. It appears in Proverbs, it appears in Psalms, it appears in many places in the Bible. The principle that we may think that the horrible things that are happening to us are from evil and for evil's sake. But actually, God reveals to us, and especially in the story of Joseph, that whatever the brothers thought for evil is the very thing that saved them. This paradigm goes all the way to the Messiah, to Yeshua, to Isaiah 53, that starts, the description of despising that root that grew out of parched land, the root of Jesse, the son of David, the Messiah himself. The idea is so prevalent, and it's so important for us today to understand this principle. We may think that what's happening to us is terrible, but it could be that the best thing that happened to us is the crisis, the difficulties, the strain on our faith, on our love, on our life, that ends up bringing the glory of God down from heaven right on our head. Yep, what we thought was for evil, God can, and He does very often, turn that for good. Especially if we do our best to be righteous and to be holy and to be proud of being disciples of Yeshua Mashiach and not ashamed of Him. Because if we're ashamed of Him, then we're going nowhere. And then whatever we thought was for good will turn out for evil. The opposite paradigm. Again, I'm repeating that. Sometimes we thought the best thing for us, the great victory that we have, maybe in the world, in the finances, maybe in other areas of our life, that can turn to be the biggest thorn in our flesh. This paradigm is very important, folks. And I suggest that you read the story of Joseph from chapter 37 on to the end of Genesis. Not very many chapters. An hour of reading. I read it in one piece because it's a novel. It's a whole story, one of the few whole stories in the Bible that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's drama from the beginning to the end. So now we're in chapter 47, verse 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. In other words, Joseph makes sure that Jacob and Benjamin and all the brothers and their families and their flocks come to Egypt, and he puts them in the most lush, beautiful, full of water part of Egypt, the land of Goshen. And they live there. And Jacob is there with his children, with his grandchildren, and Joseph and his family are not too far. And then Jacob dies. 17 years he lived under the shadow of Joseph in the riches of Egypt. He lived 147 years. But before he dies, verse 29 of chapter 47, when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of the land of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." That takes us back many chapters back when Sarah dies in chapter 25 of Genesis. He buys the cave in Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, pays for it 400 pieces of silver to Ephron the Hittite, and makes it the family grave. The family grave. Wow. Sarah dies, she's buried there. Abraham dies, he's buried there. And now Jacob dies, and he asks from Joseph to make sure that he's carried back from Egypt to the land of Canaan, to the city of Hebron, and buried there with his grandfather and his grandmother and his father Isaac. I think it's a very dramatic thing. What's dramatic about it? That these people who lived in the land of Egypt, let's compare it to something that we all know. They lived in New York, in Manhattan, in the 35th floor of a luxury apartment building overlooking Central Park. That's what I would compare the land of Goshen to. And when they die, they don't want to be buried in Manhattan, in the land of Goshen. They want to go back to that small piece of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River and be buried together with their fathers and their mothers and their grandmothers and their grandfathers. This is very unique. This is very Israel, folks. Because that is a confirmation of the promises of God and of the prophetic fulfillment of His promises. I want to go back, be buried in the land that has eternal promises to it. That it will be the eternal possession of Abraham's seed. It's important. Joseph himself, when he dies, he's embalmed like the pharaohs, but he wants to be buried in the land of, and when the children of Israel leave Egypt and cross the sea in dry land, they are carrying the sarcophagus, the burial box of Joseph to the same tomb, to the same cave, to the same city of Hebron in which Abraham bought the cave several hundred years earlier. So Joseph comes, his father invites him, and he comes, and he doesn't come alone. He comes with his two sons. But before that, Jacob wants him to swear, to take an oath that he is going to be buried in the land of Canaan, in the cave of Machpelah with his forefathers. And he tells him, swear to me. And he swore to him that Israel bowed himself at the head of the bed. Joseph goes back to the city where Pharaoh is, to the city where he lived, probably Heliopolis of today. And he gets a message. Your father is very sick. And he takes his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, and he goes to visit his father on his deathbed. And Jacob's messengers tell him, Joseph and his two sons are coming to see you. So Israel, at his last strength, sits up on the bed, straightens himself up on the bed, and he sits on the bed. And Jacob sees Joseph. And he starts telling him his story, a short version of the story of Jacob. God Almighty appeared to me in Luz, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. Where is Luz? Luz is Bethel. That is the ancient Canaanite name of Bethel. The fact that it is called Bethel in the book of Genesis is what is called an anachronism. The writer knew that Bethel's ancient Canaanite name was Luz, which means that the text was written sometimes after the children of Israel arrived in the land of Canaan and conquered Bethel in the book of Joshua. And God said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and will make you multitude of people, and give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. This is the third time that this promise of God is given, only in the book of Genesis. Chapter 13, verse 15 is the first time. Chapter 15 is the second time. And now Jacob repeats this promise that was given to Abraham. Very interesting. He's telling Joseph, the prime minister of Egypt, the man second to none except Pharaoh himself. He's telling him, look, you may be Joseph, the second to Pharaoh in Egypt, but you should know that God is faithful to keep his promises. He will make you fruitful and multiply you, and will make you multitude of people, and give this land to your descendants as an everlasting possession forever. Oh, we're now in the land of Israel. We returned in our congregation with people that came from Russia, and people who came from Bulgaria, like myself, and people who came from Iraq, and people who came from Georgia, Russian Georgia, and people who came from United States, and people who came from other parts of the world. Returning home, folks, to the land that was promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Jacob is repeating that promise right here in chapter 28 of Genesis. And now to your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to Egypt, they are my sons. They're just as much my sons as Reuben and Simeon. What is Jacob telling Joseph? I am adopting your children, who are my grandchildren, and giving them the status of my children. Why is this important? Because they will inherit the land. Not only will they inherit the land, Ephraim and Manasseh inherit the bulk of the land, some of the best parts of the land, right in the middle of the land, from the sea, almost from the sea to the Jordan River, and across the Jordan, the half tribe of Manasseh. Huge part of the land. The other tribes, Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali, Asher, got smaller pieces. But the children of Joseph got the bulk of the land. So that gives us the kosher stamp for what happens in later history, Israelite history, where Ephraim becomes one of the most powerful tribes. The leading tribe of the 10 northern tribes of Israel that separated from Judah in the days of the son of Solomon. It's interesting that we see the principle that is called in Hebrew Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim. Whatever our fathers did became the sign, the direction, the vision, and the future of their children. Ah, what a principle this is for us today in the 20th century. We're talking about educating our children. We're talking about raising our next generation as believers like we are. We're talking about, overcoming the strains and the pulls and the influences of the world in our life. And right here in the book of Genesis, in the words of Jacob, we see that whatever the fathers did became the path or the sign for his children. I wish I knew that when I was younger and my children were babies. My children are good, they're believers, they're strong believers, and my grandchildren, but dear brothers, this is a principle that we need to all take. We're worried about our next generation. We're worried about our children, our grandchildren. But worry is not enough. We should take in advance this teaching of the Torah before we make the children and before we have grandchildren. Then we'll save ourselves a lot of pain and heartache and problems in the future. And Jacob continues to bless Joseph and to bless his grandchildren Ephraim and Manasseh, And then he switches in verse 7 of chapter 28. He said, I came from Padan. Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan on the way, and there was but a little distance to go to Ephrat. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem. I think that this is a beautiful situation. Jacob's love for Rachel didn't stop even after she died. And he tells Joseph where his mother is buried. And until today, that tomb of Rachel is considered a holy place. But I want to skip a little bit and go to some interesting things that we have here in this text. And that is the 12 tribes are getting blessed. No, most of them are getting blessed. But Levi and Menashe, no. Levi and Simeon, not Menashe, sorry. Levi and Simeon are not getting blessed. They're getting cursed. Jacob doesn't bless them. He curses them. Why? Because they embarrassed him in front of the people of the land in Shechem. And they went and tricked the men of Shechem and then forcibly circumcised them all. I don't know with what kind of knife, but it must have hurt a lot to circumcise all the adult men of Shechem, not only the babies. And then verse 16 of chapter 28. Jacob tells Joseph something amazing. He says, and the angel has redeemed me from all evil. The angel revealed himself to Jacob in Bethel. Redeem me from all evil. And he blessed the lads, the boys. And he said, let my name be upon them, and the name of Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Here we are. What do you mean? Let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Well, the word multitude is not in the text. What's in the text is, I'm going to read it from the English text, but with the Hebrew meaning. Let my name be upon them, in other words, I adopt them, and the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into fishers in the earth. The word in Hebrew is idgu. Let them fish. Multitude, much fish among the inhabitants of the land. In the midst of the earth doesn't say anything. Bekerev haaretz means among the inhabitants of the earth. And he gives that title to Abraham and Isaac. And how do we know about Abraham? What do we know about Abraham? Right in the beginning of the story of Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis, dear brothers and sisters, it says that Abraham took Sarah his wife and Lot and his family and the souls which he had made in Haran. To make souls in Hebrew, la'asot nefashot, is to do mission work, evangelism. And Abraham brought with him, probably 1,000 people in his camp. 318 men between the age of 20 and 50. They had wives, they had children. He evangelized. And this is where Yeshua gets the idea, I will make you fishers of men. Like who? Like Abraham, your father. Hallelujah. My time is up, folks. But keep reading. And I will touch the highlights for the next portions, which is going to be the beginning of the book of Exodus. God bless all of you. Keep studying.
International, www.netivyahinternational.org.